Hello and welcome to Durkheim Solidarity and Punishment Part 2. So, couple quick reminders. Again, these are the same ones that are from Part 1, but I want to make sure that we're just got these things in mind. So, collective consciousness, a phrase that at this point now I have discussed and defined many times, but it's important and it's good to just get it prompted. And feels like my bald head is like extra shiny today. Is that? Yeah, it's a lot of glow there. Anyway, hope it's not distracting. But anyway, collective consciousness consists of ways of acting, thinking, and feeling external to the individual and endowed by the power of coercion, by reason of which they control him. The collective consciousness is what creates a sense of solidarity among members of a group. So solidarity is that sense of, hey, we are a group, that sense of being bound together, that sense of being connected to one another. And a quick reminder about just the term deviance. When we're talking about deviance, we are talking about actions that lead to punishments. So for Durkheim, and again, for future arguments that we're going to be dealing with, it is not the act itself, that it is not the norm violation. It's not what the person does that makes something deviant, that makes the person deviant, that makes an action deviant. It is others' responses. So if you do something that others punish in one way or another, anything from a dirty look to throwing you in jail for the rest of your life to execution, that was a deviant act. Okay. That's the criteria that we use to decide, is something deviant or not. So previous video, we talked about mechanical solidarity. In this video, we're going to deal with organic solidarity, and structured the conversation the same way, where we're going to go through this series of questions. Where do we see organic solidarity? Under what sort of circumstances? What is organic solidarity? Within societies built on organic solidarity, how do people relate to the world? How do people relate to each other? What form does the collective consciousness take? And how do people punish? Okay, so same set of issues. So starting off, first question, where and when do we see organic solidarity? Well, we see organic solidarity in really any society after the Industrial Revolution. There are going to be, so basically, pretty much everywhere in the modern world, there are going to be pockets of places in the world that would not be built on organic solidarity, that would still be built on mechanical. So, untouched tribal groups that are in the rainforest somewhere, or some areas of Pakistan or India, the small villages, but they're rare, though. They're, for the most part, the world we live in, the societies that are around us in the world, are going to be built on organic solidarity. So anything post-industrial revolution. So mechanical solidarity, we saw that type of social organization among nomadic hunter-gatherers, agricultural societies, during feudalism, when people were raised in very similar circumstances, had virtually identical socialization experiences, and so were bound together by their similarities and by their shared religions and blah, 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 all the stuff I already talked about. But once we hit the Industrial Revolution and the transformations that come along with it, that leads to some radical shifts in the way that people deal with each other and the way people are bound together into a society. And so what are we talking about here? Well, instead of solidarity through similarities, instead of being bound together through our being alike, being the same or close to the same as one another, we are bound together through interdependence. So we need each other. It's not that we're like each other, it's that we need one another. And we can see this in a pretty basic form on something like an assembly line, where you have a lot of different people who are doing very small tasks that contribute to the construction of something larger. So it might be clothing, it might be cars, it might be, in the meat packing industry, we have assembly lines where people, move from slaughtering animals to removing organs to processing and so on. And the construction of electronics, I think in this image, it looks like they're working with battery. I'm actually not even sure. I thought it was a cool picture, but I'm not completely sure what they're doing in this last one. But it is certainly a very modern industrial approach to work. But what we see here are lots of people who don't know each other. They're strangers, or very likely strangers. They don't have to have personal connections to each other. They don't have to be alike. They just need to be able to cooperate in one way or another. It's not just in factories. We also see that kind of logic and operation in offices as well, where we have lots of people who aren't personally connected to each other, but who all have different tasks and need to cooperate in order to accomplish something, a larger, broader task. So they're bound together through the process of trying to complete something, the process of trying to accomplish something, get something done. So how, in this context, do people relate to the world? Well, when we talked about mechanical solidarity, we saw that people are very self-sufficient. So the group, the individual, has a lot of skills that, for instance, we talked about the Amish, where if you are a member of an Amish community, you want to build some new community building, well, you don't hire an electrician from over here and a carpenter that you find online and just a series of general contractors that are all strangers. No, the community, this group of like-minded, personally connected people come together and construct the building themselves. They are, as a group, self-sufficient. We are not like that in the modern industrial / post-industrial world. We are not very self-sufficient. We will think of ourselves as being self-sufficient. We will think of ourselves as being independent, but we are not. We are really, really, really dependent on other people. Now, we tend to think about independence in this particular way where, well, I'm independent because I can buy food and I can pay for the clothing that I need and I can pay the heat bill for my apartment. I can pay for my apartment. I can do all these things. But when you say things like that, you're not really saying that you're independent. I mean, you think you are, but all you're really doing is highlighting how dependent you are on the efforts of other people. Because yeah, I can pay to have access to my apartment, but I don't know how to build an apartment. Yeah, I can buy food. I don't know how to grow food. I mean, maybe I could grow some tomatoes and not kill the plant, but I don't know how to provide enough food to keep myself alive outside of the context of giving people money who then give me food, right? So we're very specialized, right? But with that specialization means we are not self-sufficient because we only have very narrow ranges of skills. So, we have people who, for instance, might be engineers, we have gas station attendants, office workers, people who are working in retail, selling things, we have designers, lots and lots of different types of people, all that are very specialized, are very skilled in one small area, but in every other area, they're dependent. So the person who, for instance, right here, knows how to design a car, for instance, knows how to design cars, might know how to design other forms of technology as well. But that's it. That's really it. That's what that person can do. You take away the broader society in which they're in, that person's going to die, because you can't design a car and have that turn into food unless you can sell your designs to someone who gives you money, and then there's someone out there who's going to sell you food. All right, so we are deeply dependent on others. We have hyper specialized abilities, skills that we use to gain money, that we then use to buy all the other things that we need, right? All the other things that other people produce. And that's where that interdependence comes from. So how do people relate to each other? I've actually already, kind of been saying, but just to emphasize, we relate to each other through this mutual dependence. And it's a mutual dependence through the division of labor. So I mentioned that a little while ago. Division of labor is a way to organize people in a way that each person contributes some very small amount, some very small specific task to the overall project. Now, we can think about, like an assembly line in a factory, right? So we think about people building cars, for instance. No one builds a car from start to finish by themselves, unless it's like a hobby or something. But nobody does that at GM or Ford or Toyota or wherever. It is factories full of people, all of whom have very specialized jobs. And they're able to produce a lot of cars in a relatively short amount of time. But if every person had to build a car from start to finish, you wouldn't have very many cars. And so we have this very strong push towards the division of labor, towards dividing up labor. So we can see the division of labor within, for instance, a factory, but really our entire economic system is built on this giant division of labor. And it is so staggeringly complex that it is virtually impossible to wrap our heads around. So I want to give you an example right now that is a very incomplete example, but I'm hoping it just kind of sketches out what I mean when I say that we have this very large society, very large system with a lot of very specialized, focused people who can all do like one thing. But because each of us only has one skill to contribute, we become hyper dependent on other people. So let's talk about cars. Where do cars come from? So when I say where do cars come from, what I'm really getting at is how do we end up with cars? Like I have a car, you might have a car, might have had a car at some point. Well, how do we end up with the car that we have? Well, there's a lot of steps involved, okay? First, cars got to be designed. Now, I'm obviously skipping a lot of steps. So, we need a person who knows how to design cars. But it's not just going to be a person, it's going to be a whole bunch of people. And then there's like, who taught the person their engineering skills? Like, there's a whole lot of people that I'm ignoring right now. But we'll just simplify. So we need someone or some group of people who know how to design the car. So we need automotive engineers. We need raw materials. So we need people to mine the metals. We need people to harvest rubber. We need people to just get the stuff, the physical things that we need, the material items that we're going to take from the earth, from the ground, or from the trees, or whatever, and from the natural environment, and that we're going to use to then turn into a car, right? We don't just have steel magically laying around, right? We don't just have copper magically just, in a factory ready to be turned into a car. People need to gather those raw materials. So we have huge numbers of people working to gather raw materials. Then those raw materials need to be shipped places. So need to be thrown on boats and giant container ships, need to be thrown on trucks, moved from one place to another to be refined and used to build smaller parts. Then those parts actually need to be shipped again to an assembly line. So you need to take all the individual components, all the individual parts, put them together into a car, then take those cars and bring them, ship them all throughout the country or the world where they could then be sold at a dealership. So great, all that happened. Now we have a car. Woohoo! It's great. But no, there's still a lot of other stuff, right? So there's the process of no car exists to a car exists and we now own it. But there's tons of other stuff as well. And, all of these things, right? So we talk about, the salesperson, right? We talk about the person driving the that terrifyingly massive truck covered in cars that if I had to drive, I would have a panic attack and just, it would not be good to be on the highway that day, my friends. It would be rough. We have the people on the assembly line, right? So, sorry, I'm going back. But at each one of these steps, we have people who are doing things. But when we get to the point where we just have the car, there's still a whole bunch of other people who we need and who need us, right? So we need insurance. We need to make sure that if we get into an accident that we can pay for the other person's car. We can get our own car repaired. We can cover medical bills. So we need insurance agents. We need insurance underwriters. We need insurance companies who have CEOs, who have accountants, and all kinds of other people that work for them. So we need those people. We need gas to put in our car. Cars don't run on dreams and pixie dust, as far as I know. I'm not a car guy. For the most part, they run on gas and other types of fuels. So where do we get gas? Well, we extract the gas from the ground, right? It's either in the ocean or on land. I don't know. I don't know a lot about the gas in oil industry. So doing the best I can. So we need to extract the gas. We need to ship it or get it to a refinery. And then it needs to go from the refinery into a truck. And then that specific guy, and only that one guy needs to take the gas and put it in your car, or you're going to put it in your car, right? But you need fuel, right? Also, what about maintenance? You need to maintain the car, right? Cars break down over time. They need all kinds of work. So we need mechanics. We need people who sell auto parts. We need tow trucks for when we break down. And then when we break down, we might need a Lyft or an Uber or a taxi to get us to where we need to go so that later on we can go get our car back. Or just, our car goes away temporarily and we need to be able to travel places. So we need all these other types of people. Well, sometimes we get into accidents, right? Well, what happens then? Well, then we have police who come to the scene. We have firefighters. Just a little quick side note, by the way, I'm the child of a firefighter. And people don't know this, but whenever you see a situation where there are police and firefighter at the same scene, you know who's in charge? The firefighters, which I think is great. So just because, again, child of a firefighter, but they're the ones who are in charge. So you got to listen to them. So the firefighters show up, tow trucks show up. If there are two cars, you're probably going to need two tow trucks, right? So you have the drivers there. Then you need a way to get away from the accident, right? If your car is just broken or destroyed or damaged, you need to be able to get home, right? So you might need an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi, or maybe an ambulance, because maybe you're hurt. Maybe you are injured and you need an ambulance, and that ambulance needs to take you to a hospital where you're going to see a doctor. And then you're going to spend some time in the hospital getting treated with medicines and treatments and whatnot. And then you need to go to physical therapy. You need a physical therapist. And then while you're in the hospital, you have an insurance claims adjuster who's examining the damage to the car. Actually, you probably need two of them because each insurance company is going to hire their own or going to have their own, because the two insurance companies are probably going to argue with each other. You need a mechanic to do the work on the car if work can still be done. And you might need to go to court as well. I mean, traffic court or some other think about it. Who knows what happened? Maybe you end up having to buy another car, or maybe you just end up on the bus, right? Maybe that just, the car thing's not working out for you. So you just ride the bus. I spent a lot of years on the bus. I don't want to go back to the bus, so I drive carefully because the bus is okay, but the bus also sucks. I mean, if you ride the bus a lot, I'm not judging you. I'm just saying, I was there. I've been there, didn't like it, don't like the bus. Bus sucks. So we have a situation where, or a type of society in which we have a bunch of very, very different kinds of people who are all contributing very specialized skills to complete, or in order to allow others, in order to support others and receive support themselves. Okay. Within this context, we want to think about what the collective consciousness looks like. Because when we talked about mechanical solidarity, the collective consciousness was rooted in the fact that we all have the same essential worldview, the same sense of morality, the same ways of thinking and feeling that are generally going to be rooted in religion. But if we have this enormous division of labor, people don't need to be similar to each other. If the person who is working at the oil refinery doesn't need to be anything like you in order to use the gas that gets produced at the refinery, right? So the collective consciousness is going to be, it's going to take a very different form in societies built on organic solidarity. So again, here's the collective consciousness is. And the collective consciousness in societies built on organic solidarity is built around what Durkheim calls the cult of the individual. The cult of the individual. It's a really interesting phrase. And consists of common beliefs and sentiments. So we see common beliefs and sentiments. So that goes back to is very similar to our definition of collective consciousness. That focus on the worth and dignity of the individual rather than the collective. So we see a shift away from focusing on the group toward focusing on the individual and the individual satisfaction and happiness, individual differences, the idea of individual freedom as taking center stage, the idea that we as individuals have individual rights and human rights, not just as members of groups, but as individual people, right? The idea, for instance, that we all have individual rights as just something inherent in us is a new idea. Hasn't been around for a very long time, especially when you consider how long humans have existed. But we almost venerate, or we consider as sacred, the idea that the individual person has value and has value apart from the collective. Okay, so it's this weird idea where the thing that binds us together is our shared is our shared idea that we as individuals need to have individual freedom to do what we want and live the way we want to live. It's kind of weird to wrap your head around, but you think about the people who are around you. Look around, as you're out in the world, you're going to see people of different religious backgrounds, political opinions, different manners of speaking, different languages, different manners of dress, and so on. So there's not a lot in terms of ideology that's going to bind people together, but there is almost certainly going to be a shared sense of a shared conception of individual freedom and a shared conception of the worth and dignity of each individual human life, right? That's an idea that we pretty much all share. It permeates our society. And so, again, to this question of, do people need to be similar to one another to cooperate? No, they don't. So if we think about, someone who owns a car and a mechanic, does the car owner need to have some kind of personal connection, some type of religious connection, some type of shared basis of experience with the mechanic in order for them to cooperate with one another? No, not at all. The person who has the car needs the car fixed. The mechanic needs money. That's it. As long as the person with the car can give the mechanic money, both of them get what they need. So there's that dependence on each other. They need each other, but they don't need to be the same as each other. So there are many, many ways that we can be different, but let's think about religion for a second. Within mechanical societies built on mechanical solidarity, God, that is a mouthful. In societies built on mechanical solidarity, religion generally is going to serve as the source of the collective sentiments and ideas about morality and all that. But in modern contemporary societies, if we think about the mechanic and the car owner, do they need to be the same religion? No. I mean, one can be Buddhist and the other Catholic. One can be Muslim and the other Shinto or Jewish or atheist or whatever. Doesn't matter. So people do not need to be similar to each other in order to cooperate within a division of labor. All that matters is that mutual dependence on each other. One needs to get the car fixed, the other needs to get money. And it's not just religion where people can be different. It can be political positions, can be language. A mechanic and a car owner don't even need to speak the same language. I mean, they can. A mechanic can fix a car driven by someone who speaks a different language. That's not a problem, as long as there's some way to communicate. This is what's wrong with my car. So maybe someone who's just translating or something. Don't need to be the same sexual orientation, gender identity. All that stuff is stripped away. Not can have completely different moral systems, completely different socialization experiences, just wildly different. All that matters is that they are mutually dependent in that one needs to get their car fixed and the other needs money. Okay? That's what binds them together. And that's what binds all of us together, because it's not just about car owners and mechanics. It's about all of those complex networks of people who are interdependent on each other. I do want to take a quick second. I'm digressing here. This is not relevant to the lecture as a whole. I just want to ask a quick question. I just want to see if anybody got my joke here on the religion slide a bit ago. Get it? That was so I had Buddhist temple, Catholic church, then a mosque, and then a Shinto temple, and then a synagogue, and then I said atheist, and it's just a gray, empty box because there's nothing there. And I'm actually an atheist, and so this was like a representation of me and like what I feel is a joke. See, it's like get it, like it's there's just a blank. It's like an empty gray, like a void that is just you're like a husk, like an empty husk where there's just nothing. And so, I'm trying to just kind of describe my own experiences, just, as a joke. Ha ha ha. Ha. Humor. Yay. That was okay. Get it though? Get it? Do you get the joke? It's all right. It's not a great joke, but it's get it though, because it's just like atheist is nothing. Anyway, whatever. Okay, so then we are dealing with this question of how does punishment occur? Well, when we were discussing mechanical solidarity, we talked about how punishment is going to take the form of repressive justice or repressive sanctions. And that's because violations of the social rules, violations of the collective consciousness, or religious rules, whatever it is, behavior that is different from the group, presents a real threat to the group because the group is bound together by people being similar to each other. And when people deviate, that threatens to undermine the group entirely. Well, clearly, uh, we're not going to see that level of intensity when we talk about societies built on organic solidarity. Because, the sense of threat is very intense. If you are in a nomadic tribe of hunter-gatherers, or you're in a feudal state, or you're in an agricultural society, whatever. So punishments are extremely harsh. We saw burning at the stake. We saw the pillory. We saw crucifixion, stoning. These really intense punishments that come from this really intense sense of collective rage that needs to be dealt with. And that's not entirely gone from societies built on organic solidarity. But what's much more common is not repressive justice, it's restitutive justice or restitutive sanctions. So, what the hell is that? Well, restitutive justice involves some kind of punishment that's designed to restore a state. So, if you see restitutive, it's the word restore is hidden away in there. And so punishment designed to restore a state. That's not intuitive at all, right? So essentially what we're saying here is that there can be acts of deviance, there can be norm violations, there can be just things that someone does that require punishment in one way or another, but that aren't outrages to morality. So they're not going to generate the kind of like intense collective rage that we'd see in pre-capitalist type societies. Instead, what we're going to see are punishments that are designed to make it as if the offense never occurred. So it's designed to essentially restore the situation that existed before the act of deviance, before the mistake, before the norm violation. So if we think about a car accident, especially something like a small fender bender, just somebody rear ends somebody else, and there's not much damage. Actually, this image I have is pretty extreme for fender bender, but let's say it's a fender bender. Well, people make mistakes when they're driving. If you rear end somebody, yeah, the person's probably going to be mad, but they might not be. They might be completely understanding. Also, anybody who's a bystander is not going to feel a sense of collective rage because it was a mistake, right? I mean, presumably you didn't do it on purpose. But you still do need to be punished in the sense that you need to face restitutive justice. And so the punishment that's there is going to take the form of essentially erasing the accident. So you or your insurance, for instance, is going to have to pay to have the other car repaired. If the other car can't be repaired, you or the insurance company will have to pay for a replacement. If someone's injured, you will need to pay for their work that they missed, the time at work that they missed, as well as their medical bills. If they face some kind of permanent injury, then you need to compensate them for that permanent injury in the form of some kind of payment or some kind of settlement. So, no one's going to grab a bunch of bricks and start stoning you. No one's going to be tying you to a pole and lighting you on fire. But it is your responsibility to erase the damage that you've done. All right. And so in contemporary society, we see things like parking tickets. Like you inconvenience other people by parking in a spot where people aren't supposed to park, or where you're not supposed to park, or you spent too long parking somewhere so that other people weren't able to park there. There's a 2-hour limit and you spent 6 hours there. Well, that means other people can't get the spot, so you get a ticket, and that money that you pay is supposed to go to the city or the town or whatever to improve the situation for everybody. So you are paying for the violation. If you are caught speeding, you get a ticket, right? So you are paying a cost to compensate for the danger that you created. Oftentimes, the restitutive sanctions or restitutive justice takes the form of cash payments or settlements or some kind of monetary compensation. Not always, though. So if you are convicted of a crime, especially if it's like a low-level crime, you might be sentenced to community service. So you've probably seen groups of prisoners on the side of the road cleaning up the highway. I mean, the idea is something along the lines of, well, you did this damage to society, and yeah, we're not gonna, we're not gonna stone you to death. We're not gonna exile you. We're not gonna set you on fire. But you gotta contribute to make up for the damage that you did. So that might be cleaning up the side of the road. It might be just doing whatever. Also, things like prison, we think of as paying a debt to society sometimes. So your punishment is essentially built on the idea of compensating either the person that you harmed or society as a whole. Okay, so you're restoring the situation that existed before your violation. All right. And it's just the reactions are much weaker because the sense of connection among people is much weaker, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we don't see repressive justice ever. It's just that we see it much less frequently. So where in the medieval period, if you blaspheme against God, you might end up in the pillories for a day. You might end up getting burned at the stake. These really what we consider horrific punishments for what we would consider now to be minor violations. So where you might get executed, for instance, or stoned to death because you cheated on a spouse. Now you cheat on a spouse and people will be mad at you. There really aren't too many consequences for it, except for the relationship and maybe your connections to some other people. So it takes a lot to generate the kind of rage, the intense reaction that was much more common in societies built on mechanical solidarity. But it still happens. It just takes really huge, massive threats to our connection, right? It takes really, really serious, big threats for us collectively as a society to respond in the same way that people did hundreds of years ago. So for instance, in the United States, 9/11 was an event that led to this massive collective outrage that ultimately took the form of increasing solidarity among people in the United States. So where previously there were people who wouldn't have thought of themselves as particularly patriotic or particularly rah-rah America kind of types, found themselves waving flags and hanging flags outside their house and wearing flag pins and becoming much more patriotic and much more feeling a much stronger sense of connection to other people as Americans, right? Or as Americans in the sense of living in the United States. But it takes a huge event to create that kind of collective response that can restore the sense of connectedness between people, right? It takes a huge threat to generate a big response. Similar sort of example, if you are in Massachusetts, or you're from the Boston area, there was the Boston bombing, which led to this whole idea of Boston strong and all this. So people who couldn't have cared less about being Bostonians or didn't identify at all with Boston, all of a sudden now are wearing Boston strong t-shirts and things, and are kind of coming together as members of a community, where the day before they couldn't have cared less if you were murdered. Literally, they'd pick up the newspaper and find out, read about 10 different people, not 10, but okay, I got to dial it back. Read about some murder somewhere, and it's not going to faze them. After, for a relatively short time after the Boston bombing, people felt this much tighter connection to other Bostonians when they didn't feel that before. But again, it takes a big threat to generate that collective outrage, that collective desire to harm someone. In modern day society, in modern day industrial societies. So to summarize, we see organic solidarity in capitalist and post-capitalist industrial societies. Organic solidarity is solidarity through interdependence. People are very specialized so highly skilled in very narrow areas, but lack self-sufficiency. People relate to each other through this mutual dependence, through the division of labor. The cult of the individual provides us with the ways of thinking that allow us to be kind of tenuously and weakly bound together. And the dominant form of punishment that you're going to see is restitutive. So I feel like I should have some big thing now, but that's it. I'm done with this one. So I feel like I had momentum, and now it's just like I'm just gonna